Welcome back to the show. Today I want to share some thoughts with you on our doubts are traitors. Our doubts are traitors. And I do believe that I'm not the only one who deals with doubts from time to time. At least in my world, and probably your world too, that you've seen, I know I've seen, that a lot of people forfeit potential. They forfeit the future. They forfeit what possibilities, good things could happen to them because of fear. In fact, William Shakespeare said, "Our doubts are traitors and makes us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt." Again, our doubts are traitors and makes us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. You know, I was not to take certain steps forward because maybe I was born with a certain issue or a struggle. I don't think I'm the only one watching the show today who thinks that because you were born a certain way, or that you have a struggle, or you've struggled, or maybe you don't have a certain amount of education, or maybe you're looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, you know what, I can't do these extraordinary things that John's been talking about on the shows, when you have to literally change the way you think about yourself and think about what's possible, even though you have, I use loose terms, the baggage that most people have that you may not even know they have. You know, when I was a kid, I chose not to speak up because I had a speech impediment that was really bad back then. I was afraid. I was afraid to get laughed at. I was afraid to get mocked. I chose not to volunteer for stuff because I was afraid I was going to fail. Maybe I'm not the only one here today that has that same kind of sort of struggle, that you didn't choose to step up and do the extraordinary because you were afraid that you were going to fail. Maybe we'll get into that another time. Fear and doubt, listen, fear and doubt impact your preborn potential. Fear and doubt impact your preborn potential. Because some people, and it's going to probably sound weird, but some people mentally, physically, emotionally are still infants. They haven't gotten past that make me feel good, feed me, hold me, cuddle me, and when they should be doing much greater things in life. There's a story in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, the first book in the Old Testament, about this guy named Abram, A-B-R-A-M. Abram was very wealthy. He lived in a certain part of the world, and according to the story, God told him to pick up his family and move far away, that he was going to create a lineage or a family tree that was mind-boggling, that he was going to impact the world for generations as a result of him being a good man. And I'm paraphrasing the story, of course. So then there came a time later in the storyline that Abram, which later his name changed to Abraham, and his wife Sarah lived their entire lives and couldn't have children. They had no biological kids at all. So Abraham got this great idea to, in those days they had what they called concubines, or my loose term is girlfriends, that the wives agreed to, and they were there to help bear children. So Abraham got this great idea to have this concubine and have a child by this concubine. And they called him Ishmael. And Ishmael is known still today around the world in a variety of places. But according to the story, God came to Abraham, and Sarah was kind of like behind the scenes, and God told Abraham that he was going to have a child with Sarah. Now, they were in their 90s at the time. Abraham and Sarah were in their 90s. In fact, the actual text says that I'll multiply your seed, Sarah's seed and Abraham's seed, exceedingly, that his family tree is going to be extensive. So the story says, after this time, God says, your name's not going to be called Abram anymore. It's going to be called Abraham. And it says that kings will come forth from your family tree, and your descendants will go here and there. And then later down in the story, it says that Sarah, or Sarai, her name was originally, will not be called Sarai anymore. It's going to be called Sarah. It says in verse 16, I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. And then what happened was that Abraham, by then was called Abraham, fell on his face and laughed. And a paraphrase says that, will a child be born to a guy of my age? And think about that in your own life. If you were 90, 95, 100 years old, somebody told you that you were going to be able to father a child, or you're a woman and you're going to be able to bear a child at that age, that'd be kind of funny, right? So then Sarah started laughing. And then somebody approached Sarah and said, really? Oh, no, I wasn't laughing. So the possibility of this happening was just crazy impossible. Well, to make a long story short, guess what? Sarah got pregnant by Abraham, and Isaac was born 9 months later. I don't know the backstory, I don't know the details behind it, but I know that we're still talking about this guy Isaac in the Bible some 3,000, 4,000 years later, so it must have happened. Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. It always seems impossible until it's done. A French proverb says, to believe a thing impossible is to make it so. How many times haven't you attempted to do certain things because you thought that that certain thing was not possible, so you didn't even try? I'll tell you a little secret about me. I do not put things together. I don't put shelves together. I don't put desks together. I don't put anything together. My wife does all that. You know why? Because I don't like the frustration of not knowing how to do it, so I delegate it to somebody else because I don't think that I can do it. So when I don't think I can do it, I don't even try to do it. How about that with you? If you don't think that you can do it, then you don't even try to do it. There are quite a few things in my life that for a long time, decades, I didn't think I could do certain things because of this reason or that reason. But then I decided that I need to at least attempt to do it, and now it's an everyday thing that those things are done. So the point is that when you decide to do it, when you decide to take the steps forward to do some of the extraordinary things that maybe you thought were reserved for the ultra-intelligent or the ultra-rich or somebody that was born not in your zip code or my zip code, it was reserved for those folks, then you're not even going to attempt to do the things that you might really have a desire to do in your own heart. Someone once said, never tell a young person that anything cannot be done. Quote, God may have been waiting centuries for someone, listen, ignorant enough of the impossible to do that very thing. Have you ever met people that are so naive that they don't realize that most people couldn't do certain things or do that thing, but they didn't know that it couldn't be done, so they did it? I think naivete sometimes is not a bad thing. I believe sometimes realizing that maybe you don't need to know how many people tried it before you and failed. You don't really need to know that stat for you to do the things that maybe your heart and your mind and your passion wants to get done anyway. One person said, lived 50, 60 years ago, no one gets very far unless he accomplishes the impossible at least once a day. I'll say it again. No one gets very far unless he accomplishes the impossible at least once a day. The great football coach, Vince Lombardi, said we would accomplish more things if we did not think them as impossible. Again, Vince Lombardi. We would accomplish many more things if we did not think of them as impossible. Again, fear and doubt impact your preborn potential. Fear and doubt impact your preborn potential. There's a story I read some years back called The Ambush of John Wesley Powell. Let me share the story. John Wesley Powell lost his arm in the Civil War. This, however, did not stop him from being a hero. Back in 1869, conventional wisdom said that passage through the Grand Canyon on the Colorado River was impossible. It couldn't be done. The backcountry surrounding the Grand Canyon oozed with legends of doomed expeditions. No one ever had dared stretch of river to come out alive. Of all the expeditions that had given it their best shot, there was not one survivor. Think about those stats. Not one survived. One Army lieutenant who had explored the Colorado just on the southern side of the Grand Canyon believed that powerful river so treacherous that the Colorado, along with the greater part of its lonely and majestic way, shall forever be unvisited and undisturbed. That's what he said. It was just not meant to be conquered because no one else conquered it, right? But the one-armed explorer thought he could pull it off. Again, he had one arm. On May 24th, 1869, Powell and a party of 9 stepped into their 4 small boats to attempt the 1,000-mile journey. Along the way, their party encountered numerous ambushes. They were ambushed by Legion killer rapids. They were ambushed by waterfalls. They were ambushed by boulders the size of cabins. They were ambushed by the loss of boats, critical foodstuffs, and instruments. Yet 100 days later, Powell and 5 men emerged from 2 boats. All hope for their survival had been given up 2 weeks before. They were suffering from exposure and near starvation, but they made it. What happened to the other 4 men? One decided to go back. The other 3, after numerous disagreements with Powell, left the expedition. They hiked to the rim of the canyon only to be killed by Indians. Think about that a minute. One guy decided, and listen to this, he recruited a team around him that believed it could be done. Now, there's a bigger story in there, I think, that many things that are pretty extraordinary, things, ideas, goals, projects, tasks that you're trying to accomplish, it's a whole lot easier when you rally a team around you to do these extraordinary things. So it's really up to you and me to recruit the right kind of people around us and to keep the doubters and the naysayers and the negative people at bay, to keep them away. One guy said, "I don't believe anyone ever suspects how completely unsure I am of my work and myself and what tortures of self-doubting the doubt others will always give me." That's Tennessee Williams. Wrote it years ago. Again, I don't believe anyone ever suspects how completely unsure I am of my work and myself and what tortures of self-doubting the doubt of others always has given me. Again, I go back to what I've said many times on this show, that there are some of the most famous people throughout history who struggled with self-doubt, that struggle with it every single day. They just said, you know what, I cannot keep going forward, but in this situation, I don't have a choice but to keep going forward. But very few people from the outside looking in know they had any trouble at all. So you look at people on TV, in the movies, in your workplace, in your family, who've achieved any kind of status, and you think that they got all their crap together. But you don't realize inside, internally, they're just a disaster. They're a mess. But you wouldn't see it from the outside. One of my favorite authors, he lived over 100 years ago. His name's Orison Swett Marden, S-W-E-T-T. Orison Swett Marden. In his book, An Iron Will, he writes this: "Perhaps the most valuable result of all education," it was said by Professor Huxley, quote, "is the ability to make yourself do the thing you have to do when it ought to be done, whether you like it or not. It is the first lesson which ought to be learned, and however early a man's training begins, it is probably the last lesson which he learns thoroughly." My takeaway from that is to do what you don't feel like doing every day. Now that's tough for some of us, because sometimes you and I don't want to do the things that we need to do, so we put them off. We put off changing the oil. We put off, getting in shape and staying in shape. We put off putting away things that need to be put away, or throwing away things that need to be thrown away. You know what I'm saying? That we tend to put off stuff that we should be doing every day to keep taking steps forward in our own lives. In my life, good things have happened that I never thought was possible because I chose to take the limitations off. And that's an act of will. That's an act of guts and courage and sometimes insanity. Because the people who do the extraordinary Listen, the people who do the extraordinary have to let go of what they've always done. Because if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. Again, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. And what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting things to change. I've been there and done that. Another story, it was about a group of soldiers who were in a combat zone, but one of the young soldiers became separated from the group. He found himself in a rocky, heavily wooded area and all alone, and the soldier heard the footsteps of enemy troops far away. Quickly, the soldier kept climbing up the hilly terrain trying to get away, and he saw a small, darkened cave. Maybe I can hide in one of those, the soldier thought. There was no time to consider any other option as the enemy trudged toward him. Without delay, the soldier bent down and wriggled into the murky cavity of the cave. Safe within the cave, he let out a sigh of relief. Then, listening intently, he heard the enemy troops louder and louder. They were progressively getting closer and closer. "Please, God," the young soldier prayed, "help and protect me." He bowed his head. "But whatever your will is, though, I accept and I trust in you," he said. Sitting as quietly as possible, the soldier waited in the cave with a sense of peace, believing that everything was going to be all right. With an upward glance, the soldier then saw a little spider. Listen, he saw a little spider crawling on the top of the cave. He watched as the spider spun a strong strand of silk. And then another, and then another. Miraculously, the spider began building a large web over the entire opening of the cave. Nearby, the enemy troops were searching one cave after another. However, as the troops slowly passed by the cave in which the soldier was hiding, he saw the spider web. "There's no one in there," he called. "Let's go," he mumbled to the troops. He was not going to stick his hand in no spider web, right? Subsequently, the enemy moved on and the soldier was completely safe. God made a way of escape, for a simple spider's web became the wall of protection. Listen, the temptation to whine before you reach the goal is huge. Again, the temptation to whine before you reach the goal is huge. There's movies made about it. There's stories written about it where people just whine and complain when they have to push through the hard times. When you go to the gym and you lift weights, when you build bulk, it hurts to build bulk. It's not pleasant. It burns. It's painful. But that's how you build bulk. And that kind of goes hand in hand with what goes on in life. In the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, the story about Moses, and he was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 years old, when they were given a task to go speak to the king of Egypt, who was at that time called a pharaoh. And there were, by some standards, hundreds of thousands or millions of people in slavery. And Moses and Aaron's job was to go to this king and say, "Let these people out of slavery and let them go back to their own homeland." Now, in that culture, in that situation, that was a no-no. You don't do that. So before they eventually did that, Moses came up with all these reasons why he couldn't take on this task of being the spokesman, to be the one up front in front of everybody to say, the exact quote was, "Let my people go," right? He wasn't about doing that. So he came up with all these legitimate reasons why he couldn't do it. And I wonder how many times you and I come up with all the reasons in the world why you and I can't do certain things until we realize maybe you're the only one that has the ability to do what you're challenged to do. Maybe nobody else around you has the chutzpah or the guts or the history or the knowledge or the potential developmental skill sets that could do the certain things. Maybe you're the one that people are waiting for to step up. Let me say it again. Maybe you're the one that people are waiting for to step up. So when you and I come up with all these excuses why we can't maybe you're the one. Maybe you're the one people are waiting for. Maybe this. Maybe you're holding up other people from stepping up because you're afraid to step up. Maybe you are the roadblock that's stepping in front of people's lives when they're waiting for you to step up and realize, you know what? Now that John did it, or whatever your name is, if he can do it or she can do it, now I can do it. So in other words, if you don't do it, whatever the it is, for yourself, do it for the folks that are watching. Do it for those that are behind you, waiting for some sort of inspiration and encouragement from somebody in their lives, that if this person can do it, then maybe I can too. Be that person. Because if maybe you're not that person, then the people behind you waiting for that person may never evolve, may never grow, may never reach their dreams or goals. So I go back to the story of Moses. I mean, he came up with his boatload of excuses, and then eventually, they did what they had to do. But I found in my own life, and I've talked about this on a prior show, that 80% of the people don't step up. 80% of people, sometimes 90% of people, and statistically that seems to be the case in a variety of venues and situations, 80 to 90% of people don't step up and do the hard work in order to get the extraordinary results. Again, 80 to 90% of the people don't step up and do the hard work in order to get the extraordinary results. But they whine and complain about the 10% who've paid the price, and they think that they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth or whatever, when they didn't see the blood, sweat, and tears that they had to go through for years to get where they are now. And then you have people that say, I want you to give me what you have, when you paid years and years and lots of money and time and effort and tears and lots of blood to get where you are now. So they don't want to pay the price, they just want to reap the rewards that you paid for with your life. That's another story for another show. So there's times when you and I have to understand that, are you going to be part of the 10 or 20%, or are you and I going to be part of the 80%? So the fastest way to do things that you don't think can be done is to spend, let me say it a different way, is to invest time with people who are getting it done. That's a powerful environment for me to be in personally. Whether it's a human being that I'm hanging out with consistently, or if I'm watching material about them, listening to them on discs or online, or reading their books. I'll say this probably until the day I die, that there is so much information in books that if you would just read the material in the books, it's life-changing. If you would just push yourself and develop a habit of, instead of being online, instead of Facebooking, 27 hours a day, or watching TV, or listening to music in the car, or whatever you waste time on, literally wasting time, and self-developing yourself, you can be so many miles ahead of every single peer in your life. But it's not going to come to you. You have to go to it. Joel Runyon writes in Impossible Things, the honest answer is that I didn't know if I could when I started. When I started out, I wanted to change something, but everything seemed literally impossible. But once I started and finished one thing I thought was impossible, I kept wondering, if I thought that was impossible and I somehow managed to do it, what other things that I considered impossible are actually doable? Over time, the circle of limitations kept expanding, and pretty soon, instead of telling myself that I couldn't do something, I started asking myself, why not? Why not? Now, that's a decision that only you can make. I can encourage you, I can share stories with you, I can certainly give you a boatload of illustrations and examples of people who've done it, but ultimately it comes down to the person in the mirror, you, yourself, that's going to decide whether you're going to pay the price to get in the pain, to do the things that people do to become extraordinary. And it all starts with what you tell yourself between your ears. Over in the book of Luke in the New Testament in chapter 1, it talks about how Mary was approached by an angel that she was going to deliver a child when she had never, my paraphrase, had sex with anybody. How is that possible? How can you deliver a child? How can you get pregnant without the biological effects of I'm not going to know all that here, but you know where I'm going, right? So she's like, first, she was like, how can this be? And then eventually she embraced the idea. Yes, it was a miracle. It was a one-time thing. I get it. But I wonder how many times you and I, when we initially hear something or see something, or somebody challenges us with something, then the immediate response is, that's impossible. Same thing with Moses. He first said, there's no way I can do this. How can this possibly be? Mary said. How can this possibly be? I'm not even engaged. I haven't done that. So you have to ask yourself, why not? You have to ask yourself that if other people have done it, if other people have realized some pretty extraordinary things in their lives, then why can't you do it too? So many people have achieved this. So as I wind up the show today, again, I don't pretend to have all the answers in every show. In fact, I don't have all the answers, period. But if you decide to take the steps to understand that you're going to fall on your face time after time, like Thomas Edison, he failed so many times trying to create the light bulb. I think it was 1,000 times or more. He understood that failure is a part of progress. And if you get that, if you push through the most difficult times and the discouragements and the mistakes and the failures, you're going to realize and one day wake up in a life that's going to blow your mind. My name is John Carver, and I appreciate you watching the show today. I'll be back soon.